I really like the story of when he's healing the blind person, like on the side of the road or whatever, because like I think it's like the disciples are asking him like what the guy did to deserve being blind, and he's like, he didn't do anything, neither did his family or whatever. He's like, they didn't do anything wrong, this is just what it is. And then he heals him or whatever, and everyone watching is like, what, like, wasn't that the same guy that was just like begging on the side of the streets or whatever? And he's like, yes and no, because now he's a new person or whatever. Like he can go on and live his life. And I feel like that's kind of a cool story, because it's like, it's not, people don't always have to do something wrong to be like blind or have some problem or whatever. It's just like, that's just life sometimes. So I like that story.
David and Goliath. And the reason is because I was always the little guy from all the way like high school, 9th grade, and my football coach said I reminded him of David and Goliath, and it kind of always stuck with me. And I thought it was pretty cool because I was the littlest person on the field, but I wasn't the yeah definitely wasn't the weakest.
You got this? No, apparently not. I have to go fishes and loaves. Being in the hospitality part of this place, the thing about the fishes and loaves story is that there seems to be worry in the beginning that there's not going to be enough food. So I think what happens is if people have faith. Like I equate that to myself. Like anytime I have an event, I'm always thinking, oh no, do we have enough food? Did I get enough of this? And more people are coming, and I get concerned about it, and then there's always a crap ton of food left over. So those 12 bushels that are left over are, so I relate a lot to that story.
I always found the story of Jesus with the woman at the well very fascinating, because she being a Samaritan woman and him being a Jew, it was very taboo for them to interact and to associate with one another. But he didn't see that as a thing. He just saw her as a person and talked to her, and I like to think I can try to connect with that too and see people as a human rather than like their title. Yeah.
The one that always stands out to me is the story of the woman at the well, where Jesus is so compassionate, even though she is so seemingly undeserving, based on the standards of the time. She's considered an adulterous woman, and she's got X amount of husbands, and she's trying to kind of survive, because she tells him, I have no husband, and he's like, you're right, you've had like 5. And he's still compassionate, and he takes the time to really get to know her and to see her for who she is, not just what she's done.
One of the stories that has always stuck with me is the parable of counting the cost, where Jesus is speaking to a crowd, and he asks them, before you start building a tower, wouldn't you first sit down and really plan out the materials that you're going to need and really just estimate the cost of it? And I try to think about that both literally and figuratively at times, whereas I try to imagine my life as that tower, and each milestone I achieve is just like an added layer on top of it. So yeah, really just being prepared, being ready for anything, and always trying to be 2 steps ahead. But yeah, just be proud of the tower that you're building.
Well, there's a bunch of stories in the Gospels where Jesus interacts with people that are considered by the society as unclean. And what's notable about those stories is how the gospel writers point out that Jesus was willing to touch them. And these were people that, like with leprosy, for example, that were ostracized from the rest of the society. They lived in their own colonies, and when they did come into the regular towns or villages, they had to actually announce that they were unclean as they walked around. So it was horrible. And nobody was allowed to touch them, or else then you would be unclean and you would be cast out of the society for a while. And so, for example, in Matthew, I think the 5th chapter, there's a man with leprosy, and he says to Jesus, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus just says to him, "I am willing." And then Matthew points out that Jesus touched the man. So it points out a couple of cool things about Jesus, that he was not only willing to touch the untouchable and love them that way, but also to make that statement to the society that just so wronged these people.
Yeah, I had to think about this one because there's a few. But I was thinking about, one of the things that I just really love about Jesus is he was always kind of throwing it in the face of the authority, not just for the sake of being a rebel, but for the sake of some of your rules just don't make sense, And so he did the Sermon on the Mount where he says, you've heard it said, but I say, and that was kind of really in their face. And then one day he did this thing where it was the Sabbath, which is, they had some ridiculous rules around the Sabbath, and they were totally missing the point of it. And so there was a guy with a bad hand, and so Jesus healed him on the Sabbath. And he had to know ahead of time that was going to drive him crazy. And I think that was kind of part of the point. So it was a teaching point that where he could show them that, hey, not about just breaking the rules, but when the rules don't make sense and you're missing the heart of what's really being said, then you kind of need to be taught. So I guess that's where I land with Jesus. Yeah.
The thing I love most about Jesus is he had a lot of stories. So I always loved his parables. Actually, a long time ago, we did a vacation Bible school with parables. Because whenever you're talking to people, the best way to connect your idea to them is to tell a story about it. And so he touched so many people by telling relatable stories at the time. And I think that's just a really important aspect of him. Just being able to break down the Father's love into a story, or how we were just talking earlier today about we need to parent how God parents us, and that's walking alongside our kids and teaching them something instead of, and getting to know that character of God instead of, he's here to get you back because you did something wrong. Yeah. He's not like that. He wants to walk along beside you. He wants to love you through the fact that you made a really crappy decision, and so you're getting some circumstances. It's not God heaping those circumstances on you. They're just the natural consequence of the decisions you made. Yeah. So he was real good to tell people about that, about responsibility. I'll give you a little bit, and you did something good with that, so now I'm going to give you a lot. And so I always just really liked his parables.
Oh, I love all the stories of Jesus, but I think probably the one that has shaped me more than others has been the story of the lost son. It used to be called the prodigal son, but really it's the lost son. And that story is basically where Jesus says there was a man who had 2 sons, and when the younger son got of age, he said, hey, give me my share, and I'll just go off and do what I want to do. And his dad said, okay. So he went off and he took all his money and he wasted it. I mean, he drank it away, he partied it away, women and drugs, and ancient drugs, which probably more alcohol. But he drank it away, and when it was all gone, he was in such a terrible place. He was like living on the street, feeding pigs, and for a Jew to feed pigs is kind of an animal they didn't have any association with, so they used that to tell how bad it got. One day, he looks down at the pig food and says, man, this looks pretty good, and he starts eating the pig food because he has nothing. Then he says, man, I need to go back home because my father treats his servants better than I'm being treated. So went back home, and on his way back, he was trying to figure out what to say to his dad when he saw him and say, I'm really sorry I screwed up. And when he was a long way off, it says, and this is found in Luke 15, when he was a long way off, his father saw him and came running toward him. Now we have to understand, in ancient cultures, these older, mature wise men did not run. They're like a sheik with all kinds of entourage. They walked or they were carried, but they didn't run. But he ran toward his son, and when he got to him, he wrapped himself around his son and said, I've missed you and I loved you. I'm so glad you came home. And he started to apologize, and he said, no apology necessary. Look, let's have a party, put a robe on him again, put a ring back on his hand. My son who was lost is found. Now that is a powerful story. It goes on to where when he gets back home, there's a party going on, everything's good, and the older brother who'd been home the whole time said, hey, I was jealous. Exactly. Why is it? I've been with you this whole time. You didn't give me any of this stuff. And the father said, look, I love it the way he says, this brother of yours, not my other son, this brother of yours, he was lost, he's found, we had to celebrate. And he goes, no, this son has done all this stuff and he's abused it and I'm frustrated. And the father kind of left him there, but the point of the story is, the father is God. The lost son is all of us. The son that stayed home is the religious section or the church, typically saying, well, we do all the right things, but really are frustrated when anybody gets ahead of us. Jesus is teaching us some great truth, that love is the nature of God the Father, not justice. That's been a game changer for me, because it's not about God trying to get at me because I've done something I shouldn't have done. It's realizing I'm one of God's kids and he loves me today just as I am. Whether I'm perfect or not, whether I screw up or not, his love for me is just like the best parent in the world. And that's been one of my favorite Jesus stories.